Hello, I'm Elise Finney, and I'm here with Second Saturday and Done with Divorce. And I'm so excited about our guest today, Cheryl Hyder of Hyder Consulting. Hi, Cheryl.
Hello, everybody.
We brought Cheryl on today because we have so many questions, and people always are curious to know what exactly forensic accounting or investigative accounting is. And so I'm just going to kind of run through some questions today with Cheryl and just get some questions answered for everybody. So first of all, Cheryl, tell me a little about what exactly forensic accounting is or investigative accounting.
Forensic accounting is not necessarily investigative accounting. They're similar yet different. And what I mean by that is forensic accounting traditionally has been defined as providing accounting services for the court. Any forensic services help parse out facts that aren't readily available to the layperson, and it requires a special skill to help whoever the trier of fact is. I mean, more broadly, it can include possibly mediators, arbitrators, anybody involved trying to, help resolve a dispute. It's anything. Forensic accounting is anything financial in nature. It doesn't just include the investigative stuff. It also includes business valuation, includes damage analysis, economic analysis, anything at all that's financial. So that
Okay.
said, investigative accounting is not necessarily always for the court. When you're conducting investigations for financial purposes, you're trying to figure out where the money went. That's simple. Your client could be an attorney, it could be an individual, it could be a company, it could be other experts who can't do their work until they understand what actually happened and what the real numbers should be. Now, contrast those two with, so investigative is probably a subset of forensic, not always, but typically. Now, the other one that's in that same ballpark is a fraud examination. You hear that term a lot, okay? Some people call it a fraud audit, which we're not going to get into, but that's a different thing, and it's actually a misnomer. That said, fraud examinations are similar to investigative accounting, but it's a narrower scope. When you conduct a fraud examination, all you're doing, right? You're looking at specific allegations so that you can help, figure out what actually occurred. And then we have fraud examination, which is sometimes called a fraud audit. It's typically a misnomer. Fraud examinations are similar to investigative accounting services, but they have a narrower scope. What that means is there's a specific allegation or a specific item that you're looking at or for. There might even be just an accusation of financial impropriety. Say, we had this much money in the bank account when this happened in our life, and now there's that. I need to understand what happened. Well, that is really a financial examination or financial investigation, rather. It might turn into a fraud examination if there's a reason to suspect that something inappropriate happened with those monies, if there was some kind of breach of trust involved.
Okay.
Folks going through a divorce like to say, or it's common for them to say, rather, I think my spouse committed fraud when they fill in the blank. And before attorneys go down this road, most of them are aware, and they need to help their clients understand that if something happened during the marriage, it's very likely both parties will have exposure if there actually was a fraud that occurred, regardless of if you're involved or not. There's just no benefit to reporting your soon-to-be ex for any kind of fraud that they may or may not have participated in. And that includes tax or, business-related frauds.
So Cheryl, talk to me a little bit more about how this all relates to divorce. Because a lot of people say, or not even the fraud part, but just the investigative part, as far as, I don't know where all the accounts are. I don't know where the money is. I wasn't participating in the marital financial decisions.
Well, that's very common for the dependent spouse. Do not have that information for whatever reason. There might be financial abuse involved. It could just be, the primary earner in the household said, you stay home, you deal with that, and I'm going to be out here making the money. And that's, it's common. And the first thing that has to be done before you can have a discussion of goals, what you want out of the dissolution of your marriage so that you can set yourself up for the going forward, is you have to understand what the financial and non-financial facts are. My piece, which relies heavily on people like you, okay, and we'll talk about that in a minute, I think, is my piece is the marital assets and the income. From the marital asset side, you have to first figure out what assets these people brought into the marriage. Now, obviously, the later in life people get married, which is becoming more and more common, it's becoming more of a challenge to figure out what they had at that point when they got married and what that's worth now. Because most people go into a marriage expecting to stay married, and they may not have those records. So we have to figure out how to get that. So what of the assets that were brought into the marriage remains, and in what form, and what should be included in the distributable marital estate? Typically, what that's talking about are things like investment accounts, real estate, retirement accounts, items like that. It could also include, precious metals, today's age, Bitcoin, some type. So it's important to know or have some idea where you could go for that. When I'm looking at that, typically, and any marital assets I'm looking for, I start with the tax return. I said this on LinkedIn, I think last week to somebody. A tax return is not like an early Christmas gift or Hanukkah gift for somebody. It's more like the opening act of a Broadway play. It's going to give you a preview of what should come when you conduct the rest of discovery. It's always a great starting point. So that's one piece of the marital assets. And then there's, again, valuing a closely held business might fall into that bucket. It might not, but typically it will, because, business is either started before the marriage or during the marriage, in which case there's value there. And we have to figure out how much that value is. Okay. Third piece is, when you're working on the marital asset piece, you've got to be very mindful that it's likely for one of the parties to have siphoned out potentially assets of the marital estate. Could happen for a bunch of reasons. Could not be intentional, could have just happened. But you have to be aware that it could happen. There's no guarantees that it will be identified where the monies went. But when you see something leaving, you can always flag that. It just depends on how good the discovery is. One of the tells that I always flag is if somebody's resistant to discovery, there's usually a reason. Okay. And it's also helping to protect the marital estate is it's another reason why folks are going to really want to think about getting financial professionals involved, all financial professionals involved sooner rather than later, because the earlier you're in, the more help you can provide, the more value you can add to it. So that's the first piece. The second piece is the income side. How much income is actually available for payment of child support and potentially spousal support, if that's warranted in the case. Support is not the same. Income for support is not the same as income for tax purposes. Otherwise, and I've said this in court numerous times, you wouldn't need a separate section of the law to define what income for support is on a state-by-state basis. You just wouldn't. Generally, what you're looking for is what has been available in theory to support the marital unit when they were here. And then now that the pieces are like this, what is available to support the pieces on a going forward basis? That's the general principle behind looking at the income. And then we have, you've got to consider also that not all income is reported for tax purposes. But said that's your opening act. Not all income could be on that tax return. There's non-taxable items. There's other sources of income that people just don't report. For example, bartering is a good one. And then we get into things like, skimming off of a closely held company, or even if money that's due to the marital estate, either from a business or some other party, could be redirected to somebody else. It's also possible that if you're just a corporate executive or just a working stiff like me, your employer was asked to hold back some bonuses for a key employee.
Cheryl, let me jump in there because you kind of touched on something about support, and that's obviously a big sticking point in any divorce. So as far as helping the client with their statement of expenses and other financial or accounting type guidance and the needs for the client, is that something that you handle? Do you help in that preparation?
Absolutely not. The short answer for this and your follow-up question probably has to do with taxes. I can do either or both, but it will not be efficient. Okay, there's a reason that, I started to specialize. With regard to the first half of your question, the expense statements, I generally suggest that the client goes with either their regular financial advisor, some people call it a private office service, or if they don't live in that stratosphere, then they could work with a CDFA, a certified divorce financial professional. They also want to, and I cannot stress enough how important this piece is. If folks viewing this take nothing else away, they need to also work with the CDFA or other financial advisor to prepare themselves for their post-divorce life. What do you guys call it? Done? Divorce done? Something?
Done with divorce, yes.
Done with divorce. When they're done with divorce in capital letters, they need to ensure before they sign that paperwork that their financial house will be in order. They might need help with budgeting. They might need help figuring out how to pay bills. I've had clients that received multi-million-dollar settlements, mansions free and clear, okay? A new car every year through their settlement. And they thought they were going to have to live literally on cat food. They didn't understand what they were getting. Not because the woman was not bright. She was exceptionally bright. She just had no concept because she never had to deal with it. So I always suggest that if the person isn't on top of this themselves, and this falls, I think, on the attorney also to make sure of, that they have somebody to help make sure that their financial house will be in order. With regard to the tax side of things, I do have a master's of tax, and I stay relatively current overall, but I just don't stay current enough that I would trust myself to prepare returns for people. There's a lot of good or even excellent preparers out there that I recommend to clients, depending on what they need, rather than just having even a list of go-to preparers. Here you go. Here's the 3 people that I trust. It depends on what you need. If I have somebody who can help you or not, typically you can. But the goal, if not yet obvious, is from my standpoint, and I think from yours as well, to leverage an amazing network of trusted, reliable, and competent colleagues to help mutual clients get to the best possible place based on a bad situation that they're in.
Yeah.
That help?
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned CDF, Certified Divorce Financial Analyst, because obviously our office, we have 2 that are partners, and that's exactly what we do. And then as far as, the taxes, again, there's a small network of people in the Northern Virginia area who specialize in divorce, specialize in taxes, and we can always refer out. Really coming to you for something that's super specific. How does someone really, obviously, as you said before, if somebody's resistant or not cooperative, then there's, usually a reason. But how do they really know, to start coming to somebody that has your skill set?
Well, in general, if there's a situation regarding asset distribution or income definition, and they can't get a handle on it themselves. I've got a client right now who thinks she has a handle on it. I'm waiting for her to engage counsel, and we'll talk about that in a minute, I think. But you want to make sure that your client always has a handle, and you have the handle if you're the attorney, on what's there. If there's a question that something doesn't make sense, it's probably because, and I say this when I teach, it's because it doesn't make sense. It's that simple. If the attorney or the client can't satisfy what I call their spidey sense after talking to each other about, well, I saw this in the documentation, what is it, et cetera, reach out to me. I have maybe 4 or more calls a week with attorneys, just as a professional courtesy. I walk them through what they're telling me. I ask questions, and I do what I call a smell test. It's pro bono. It just saves them time. It saves their client money on the back end. It's part of why I have my own organization, right? Why I do what I do. Because it's not right for people to have to land in specialized service that they don't need. Okay. I don't want to stereotype failing relationships either, talking about the imbalance of economic leverage. But if one person is more prominently, financially sophisticated and the relationship is fizzling, it's really possible that that person may not be inclined to share what they believe they've worked for, while the other person suddenly, instead of being a domestic partner, right, in the true sense of the phrase, they're suddenly not entitled to it because they were home being lazy instead of home taking care of the stuff at home. It's just not right.
So Cheryl, what we're finding a lot is people coming to us before even going to their spouse requesting a divorce. If somebody's trying to kind of prepare themselves, get kind of all their ducks in a row before approaching the subject of divorce, is that a time where they would involve you? Like, can you investigate finances without the other spouse knowing?
Absolutely. I encourage potential clients who are thinking about leaving their spouses to be proactive, gather up any relevant information they can at the first sign of a problem, rather than waiting for an attorney or a financial advisor to ask them to do so. You're going to need it. Nobody can define what's available until we know what the potential universe of information looks like. We can't tell you how much money this could cost you if we don't know that information. So obviously, though, they have to be discreet, especially if the other spouse doesn't know what's going on or isn't acknowledging that their spouse could potentially be thinking about leaving them or cutting off from them. I don't like when folks ask their mutual friends or acquaintances to help them gather the documents and copy or scan information, or even, do anything for them in the lead up to filing or separation or any of that. Because it's very easy for somebody inadvertently to slip word to the other spouse. And all of a sudden, your pipeline of data is cut off. That being said, once information is provided, I do the same type of workup, preliminary workup, that I would do as if the case were live rather than just active. Meaning I would assess the universe of information, meet with counsel, tell them what I see, we would talk about what they see, and figure out the strategy from there.
Okay. What are some of the things that people should be kind of asking you as they approach you? Like, as far as, can you identify like cost involved? I think that's a big one for people.
Right.
Want to bring their forensic accountant in, but they just don't know how much it would cost them, and they don't know how to weigh out what they might uncover versus the cost.
Well, so the cost is a really difficult thing to pin down because there are too many unknowns. Okay. There are people who say it's going to cost you this much money. And then, I read about it online. I encourage you or your clients to read up as well. Folks who do what I do that bill at a fixed fee, they have no problem going back to their client once that money is exhausted and saying, hey, we can either stop here and have this multitude of questions hanging out there, or you can give me X number of dollars more and I'll keep working. Which to me feels like you're holding the person hostage. I can't justify doing that. I go in to a case and I don't know what it's going to cost. Nobody does. Anybody who tells you differently is lying. Okay.
You never know what you're going to find. So
well, that's right. So it doesn't make sense. And I think you have to consider that there's a relationship between the available information, the quality of that information. I had one case where allegedly, the out partner, it was Lee Marvin's case. What was that? Palimony. It was a palimony case, right? And allegedly, the person that I was helping, the dependent partner, had been the bookkeeper for this company. She said, records are clean, they're great, they're wonderful. I'm like, okay, well then let's get to it. It turns out that's not the record set that I received. And I only discovered that because I took the necessary steps to vet the information first before I started using it, which is something else that a lot of folks don't do. But if you don't know what you have, you don't know if you can rely on it. So anyway, so the quality of the information is step one. the complexity of the marital estate. Is it straightforward, or is it, or are we playing, hide the ball? Are there other issues in discovery? I had one case that waited over 2 years, to finish the discovery argument. Well, every time I have to get involved and parse through what's allegedly being provided, that costs the client money, and it takes time that we shouldn't really have to get into. I can't quantify that up front. You also have to consider whether there's deliberate planning by the other side ahead of the divorce. Just like you're talking to somebody before you separate or file, the other side might be doing that too. So we won't know that until we're in there. And then it gets into, once we're in and we have a preliminary assessment of what we're looking at, then what I typically do is I just say to the attorneys, okay, and the client, we sit down, or these days, we do it online, pull up some spreadsheets and say, this is what I found. This is what I think. Now, what we can do is A, B, and C. Doing this now on a couple valuations, they're trying to settle, the cases, which is an awful lot cheaper. And if I can provide them, in one case, it's a valuation. If I can provide him just a simple, basic, not calculated value for the business, we might be able to settle. So we take that in a phased approach. Step one is, this is what it might be worth if we take the shortcut, quick and dirty approach, right? It's still following professional standards, which I haven't talked about, but just assume that professional standards are also in everything that I'm saying. And once we get to phase one is complete, we regroup. We say, okay, this is where we're at. This is what I'm seeing. These are your choices. And ideally, it's going to be a collaborative approach. And I don't mean that in a technical sense. I mean that in a, layperson's sense. It's going to be the client's going to be involved and make those decisions, which also helps them feel like they're empowered for this process. It's not going to be inexpensive, is the bottom line. But, my feeling is it's not inexpensive. Clients already, like I said, in probably not a great place. I just don't see a need to compound it. I tell people all the time, I'm really not lazy. I'm just cheap. And I'm not going to spend your money any more than I'd be quick to spend my own. If I don't need to, I don't want to do it.
Yeah. And I think we really appreciate the honesty in that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just tell me a little bit about, really who you're serving obviously you can go beyond Northern Virginia, but just kind of tell us who you're serving and how we can get in touch with you.
Who I'm serving? Essentially, I get calls from folks directly at this point. They Google forensic accounting, Northern Virginia, or business valuation, Northern Virginia. And, they call me and they say, talk to a few other folks. And sometimes they call me back and we work together. Other times they may not. And that's fine, right? So my universe extends as far south currently as Florida and as far north as New York City. I've gone as far west as Oklahoma, I think. Yeah, probably. But most of it is centered here in Northern Virginia. I've gone into DC a couple of times now. I've got something active down there. Maryland, I've kind of stayed out of, not for any reason other than I just haven't really pursued it. There's no real reason for that. Getting a hold of me, it's always better to go with email than it is just to avoid phone tag. Just like I'm sure you do and other folks. When I'm working on something, I prefer my phone to go to voicemail, and then I get back to people later when I take a break. So they can do that to get a hold of me, or, they can find me on LinkedIn, Cheryl Hyder, Northern Virginia, or even Twitter, but just understand. Yeah.
Well, good. I appreciate your time today. And if anyone has any questions, please reach out to myself, Elise Finney at argentbridge.com, or Cheryl Hyder, and we'll put your email up at the end of this as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.